Good evening, everyone. Today we will be talking about Unit 3, Analyze and Assess the Importance of Management's Role in Safety. Okay. Now, when we spoke about Unit 2, we spoke about taking ownership of safety in the workplace. Now we need to see how the organization as a whole takes ownership and uses the safety management system in the company to ensure that safety is implemented. Okay, the learning outcomes for this chapter includes identifying what a system is in a company and how a safety system fits into the company's overall system, as well as the implementation of a safety program and the identification of hazards and risks. Okay, now, as we said in our last unit, safety is so important to have in the company to ensure that our employees, our visitors, our property and environment are not going to be exposed to risk or harm or injury or damage. Okay, and the way we go about ensuring that there's no harm or damage to property and the environment and to the people, it goes by doing a risk assessment. In a risk assessment, we will identify hazards and risks that ensure mitigations can be put in place that minimize that exposure to a specific hazard and risk. So what is a risk? A risk refers to the possibility or likelihood of harm, or loss. Risk of harm is called a hazard. For example, perhaps we're doing a working at heights job in the construction industry. What is the possibility of things and risks that might go wrong? For example, we might have the scaffolding collapse or falling from heights and tools falling from heights, perhaps falling onto bypasses at the bottom of the working at heights platform. So we need to ensure as a company and management that there is a system in place called the Safety Program Plan or a Safety Management Plan. And this plan ensures that the safety policies and strategies of the company are regulated and implemented. Now, when we look at a company as a whole, before we can go into, as management, developing a safety management program, we need to obviously have a system in place. A business system ensures that the company has a purpose. What is the company's purpose? What are the inputs? What are the manufacturing or the ordering or the steps that go by to ensure that production takes place to produce an output. Those strategies and policies to ensure production and to ensure service is carried out to produce an output are the system of the company. I'm going to discuss the concepts on this slide because it's a visual slide. So as we said, the inputs. So that is what you as the company offer. What is your service or what is the product that the company offers? For example, perhaps we are a service company that provides maintenance for the construction industry by painting or by installing pipes or constructing a wall or building. So those are your inputs. Now, how do we go about actually building a wall or providing a painting job to be done as the output? Those include our systems. Now, for example, we will need the materials such as paint, paint brushes, drip trays, paint sheets, painting overalls, so forth. To include in our system of the company, we have to ensure we have a safety system as well. Okay, a safety system will now form part of the company's overall systems in place to ensure that we not only produce a quality service, but to ensure we produce a quality, safe service to our customers with no injuries or incidents or damages on site. Okay, now a system has a life cycle. Okay, its life cycle goes from the conceptual phase, where we draw up the policy or the strategies, down to the bottom where it requires continuous review and updating. Okay, we cannot develop one document, for example. We cannot just create a mission statement, or we cannot just create a company's objectives without continuous improvement and review on an annual basis. Why? Because the industries that we operate in change. Therefore, our policies and company strategies in the system of a company will have to change and adapt with the industry changes and expectations. Okay, so now your safety system is going to fall within your system and operations of your company. Okay, remember, we have inputs and we have systems, and then we have our outputs. Now your safety system is one of your strategies that you need to implement in your company to ensure we have a safe working environment. And that strategy and program is going to ensure that we know how to identify risks, we know how to go about doing a risk assessment, and how we go about doing the mitigation, and who is responsible for doing the risk assessment and who is responsible for continuous improvement. Okay, having your safety system in place will ensure we have a safe working environment with a reduced exposure to possible risks for that job task. Okay, and the way we go about that, as I said, is using the risk assessment. Your risk assessment is going to include hazards and risks that you need to identify at the beginning of the job. Before any job takes place, you have to have a identification of the possible and anticipated exposure to hazards and risks on site. Okay, and the required mitigations that could obviously be linked to minimizing the exposure to those risks. Okay, so in our safety plan and our system, we need to have objectives. Now, our risk assessment is going to be based on our safety objectives. Okay, and an example of a safety objective is to obviously have no or zero incidents on site. Okay, we do not want to have any incidents on site, and we want to have objectives of elimination or full control of our hazards on site. Okay, to minimize near misses and to have zero incidents. Okay, now when we are doing a risk assessment based on the task at hand, there are different categories those risks will fall part of. Okay, and there are numerous methodologies that can be used, which I will upload into the discussion forum just for a nice review and additional source later. Okay, so when we're doing a hazard identification, we have 4 different levels, okay, that the hazard may fall into at the initial anticipation. Okay, for example, if we're doing working at heights, okay, we perhaps could have a risk of falling at heights. If you fall at heights, that could lead to death if you do not have a safety harness on. Okay, so when you do your initial risk assessment, before you apply your mitigations to the anticipated hazard or risk, you would classify falling from heights as catastrophic. Okay, thereafter, once you've identified mitigations to reduce that exposure of falling from heights, your risk or exposure to that hazard could perhaps be marginal. Okay, so at the beginning of our risk assessment, we could say the hazard is working at heights. Potential risk could be falling from heights. And then our category of our hazard severity would be catastrophic. Then we put our mitigations in to say, to ensure that we do not fall from heights, we are going to have a scaffold inspector on site. We're going to have a safety harness inspector, and all employees will be wearing safety harnesses on site that have gone on working at heights training and have a valid medical certificate to work at heights. And we could also go on to say that they could have a tow bars, guardrails, and so forth on the scaffold to reduce any falling from heights. Okay, so once you put your mitigations in place, we can then re-evaluate what our severity could be to that exposure of that risk and hazard, and it might fall down to a marginal or even a negligible classification. Okay, so that is how you go about classifying your hazards and risks on site. We will do an initial analysis before any mitigations are put in place. After mitigations are put in place, you will then reanalyze your risk and severity, and it should definitely be lower. Okay. So this is just a type of methodology used to anticipate the severity or the likelihood. So when you are actually classifying your hazards, okay, the same rules apply to identifying your likelihood. Your likelihood before any mitigations are put in place could be, if you have no mitigations in place, you could fall from heights frequently. After your mitigations have been put in place and all your controls are in place, you may not be falling from heights on a regular basis. So you could have an exposure, or possible falling from heights could be remote or occasional. Okay, so the same rules apply from your classifying your hazard categories and your probability of occurrence. You will look at that initially before any mitigations are put in place. Once mitigations are put in place, you will reevaluate to identify how you will actually be, the likelihood of actually falling, or the likelihood of actually tripping on site. Okay. And the levels will fall and be rated down from A to E. Okay, this is just one type of methodology that can be used. Okay, so a safety system is very important to have in the workplace, as it will ensure that the risk assessment for each job is identified and everyone knows what their roles and responsibilities are. Okay, a risk assessment is a continuous working document. We do not just do it at the beginning of the job, we do it at the conceptual phase, and day to day it will be reviewed to ensure that no changes have been taking place on site based on the task at hand. Okay. Now, when we are developing our safety program, these are the type of elements that can be included. Okay, as you can see, risk assessment is in there. As a safety officer or safety representative or practitioner, you will always hear the word risk assessment. That is the core responsibility of being a safety officer on site. Okay. Okay. So this is just a classification of what needs to be in your safety management program, the different categories, and how it and who is responsible for what. So your program will then explain your entire safety management program for your company. Okay. At the end of the day, humans create the potential for hazards to occur. Okay, so when you are doing a risk assessment as the safety officer, we are actually trying to anticipate and foresee what mistakes our employees might make on site. Okay, like falling from heights. It's self-inflicted. Okay, unless there is an equipment or material default or problem, defect, which may result in injury. Okay, and most of the time, all the incidents that take place on site are because of human error. Okay, that is why it is so important to understand what a hazard is, what a risk is, how to go about analyzing those risks, and then putting mitigations in place to reduce the severity and likelihood of possible exposure. Okay. These are just the 3 different types of components that you could be exposed to when doing hazards. Okay, we identify what the hazard is itself, for example, working at heights, what the trigger might be to cause the hazard, for example, maybe it's raining, you're working at heights, slip and fall, which you should not be working at heights if it is pouring and raining, or too windy, over 45 kilometers per hour. And then also what the threat is. Are you going to be dying if you hit the ground, or if it's only a 1.5 meter fall, are you going to sprain your ankle, and so forth. Okay. Now, when we are doing our risk assessment and identifying our risks and our hazards, there are different life cycles. Okay, so this life cycle means at the beginning of our job, we are going to do the conceptual phase. This means we're going to meet with the construction managers and supervisors, and we're going to identify what anticipated risks we might be exposed to. Okay, we're then going to go on to the design phase. We're going to draw up our risk assessment, and we're going to do our calculations of what the risk is, and we are going to put in mitigations, okay, to control and minimize the exposure to those risks and hazards. We will then move on to the production phase. While everyone is working on site, we are going to review, and we're going to identify what additional we're going to review and ensure that the risks and hazards in place are actually correct, and we're going to identify if any changes need to take place with regards to those mitigations. Okay. Then the 4th one will be operational phase. Are there new risks and hazards we might be exposed to that we didn't anticipate? We will then go and update our risk assessment. Okay. For example, you may be audited on site and they identified a risk of housekeeping where there's tools and equipment lying in the walkway, which could lead to a trip and fall, okay, which is a risk and hazard. You would then update your risk assessment and your mitigations in place and implement those mitigations. When the job is done, you are then going to sign off your risk assessment and keep it for future record. Okay. Now, when we are, as I said earlier, when we are analyzing the risk exposure and severity and the likelihood of it happening, there is a calculation and there is different methodologies that you can use to calculate, which, as I said, I will upload onto the discussion forum on ICANN at a later stage. Now, your risk, to calculate your risk, you will have your initial risk before any mitigations will take place. So your risk will be probability times the severity. And that calculation will come on based on the methodology you're going to be using. Okay. And that will come directly from the company. Okay. So you identify and calculate what your initial risk is. And then you're going to put in the mitigations to reduce that exposure to the risk. And you will recalculate your risk, which should give you a lower value. Okay, your mitigations are there to minimize your exposure. Okay. Now, there are different quantitative methods used to analyze system safety data. Okay, and these are called positive and negative analytical trees. Okay. Now, as I said, there are multiple methodologies used, and each company will have their own methodology. Okay, a positive tree are developed to ensure that the system works correctly. Okay, where we need to follow the methods of how we go about our job task at hand, and then based on our methods, or a method statement for that specific job. We will then identify the risks and hazard associated for each step and phase of the job. And negative trees are used to identify potential failures before they occur. Okay. The positive trees are used as planning tools and can be used as inputs for hazard analysis. Okay. So here it is, a positive and negative analytical tree identified. It is giving you the steps and the material required to execute the job, and based on that you can then go on to identify what your hazards and your risks are. Okay. Alright, so this is just a repetition of what I've been speaking about with a risk assessment. Okay, a risk assessment is there to identify what we are exposed to and the severity of it, and how we can minimize our exposure. Okay, that brings us to the end of Unit 3. We are now going to move on to Unit 4. Okay, so let's look at Unit 4. Okay, characteristics and qualities of a successful safety practitioner. Okay, now we're going to look at what the roles and responsibilities are of a safety practitioner and how you can go about ensuring a successful safety management plan is implemented based on what we discussed in Unit 3. Okay. Now, implementing an occupational health and safety management system can be complex, which means you as the safety officer or the practitioner for the company cannot do it in isolation. You have to work as a team with management to ensure that a successful safety system is implemented and is continuing to be improved and reviewed throughout. Okay. So what is a safety practitioner? In the context of occupational health and safety, there are many titles, tasks, and responsibilities. Okay. For example, we have the safety reps, who would report to your safety officers, and we have safety practitioners, consultants, and advisors who are above the safety officers. Okay, a safety practitioner falls under Section 19(3) of the Act, which when we refer to the Act, we refer to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, being part of the Health and Safety Committee of an organization as a health and safety representative. Okay, so you could be a safety rep, you could be a safety officer, or a safety consultant or practitioner based on what your experience is within the industry and safety. Okay. If you are a registered safety officer with the SACMPC, you will then be a safety officer. Okay. And you could also fall under the safety management or the safety practitioner for the company. I'll also upload the SACMPC registered persons. It is the governing body of safety for South Africa. I will upload that onto RCAN later. Okay. So it is important that the safety officer or the safety practitioner implement and maintain occupational health and safety systems in the workforce. So it is your responsibility to implement the items we've discussed in Unit 3. Okay. So, what are the characteristics to be a safety officer? What do you as an individual actually need to portray to ensure that you execute your job successfully? Well, you need to have, first of all, knowledge and skills, okay, within your industry. Industry experience is vital. To become a registered safety officer with the SACMPC, they recommend at least 3 to 5 years working experience before becoming a registered person. And once you become a registered person, you can be contracted out for larger jobs, and you will obviously get a higher rate salary. Okay. So, as a safety practitioner or officer or safety rep, you need to be able to have enthusiasm. You need to be able to have good relations and communications with the workforce, and not sit in the corner and keep to yourself. Because if you do that, you're not going to be able to have a quality safety system. You need to be able to communicate to that individual on site, you are not doing a safe job. Please stop, and then put in the mitigations to ensure that what they're doing becomes safe. Okay. And it is important that the safety officer or practitioner, they are the middle person between the employees working on site and management. Okay. You as a safety officer will oversee what they are doing on site to ensure it's safe. If there are any unsafe acts, you immediately report it to your construction manager on site. Okay, you obviously need to have knowledge and skill, like I said, in the workplace. Okay. So for the safety practitioner to be successful, he or she must function within the organizational structure. Okay, so you will form part of an important connection between the management and the employees. Okay, your full responsibility is to ensure that the company is operating safely, which means you need to be able to consult and advise top management if the safety management system needs further mitigations. Okay. So, what is the relationship between the safety practitioner and organizational management? Like we've said, all right, the safety management team needs to ensure that they are continuously updating management, okay? And that can come through the HSE committee meeting, where it will form part of top management, construction managers and supervisors, and the safety and management officers or practitioners of the company, where you will discuss as a whole what is happening in the workplace, what is unsafe, what needs to be done, and when we need to implement those mitigations to ensure a successful and safe working environment. Okay. And like we said, from Unit 3, we have goals and objectives in safety. For example, we want to have zero tolerance to incidents on site, and we want to eliminate all possible major hazard exposures. Okay, so it is your responsibility as a safety officer or the safety rep to adhere and implement such responsibilities and objectives. These are just a list of other responsibilities you might be exposed to. For example, you as a safety officer or practitioner, you need to ensure that you have all your legal appointment letters in place for the workforce, to have they gone on all the required HSE training. For example, do your first aiders have first aid training? Do your firefighters have firefighting training? Is your incident investigator qualified and have the competent incident investigation training? All of these HSE requirements are needing to have HSE training, which is listed from the legal appointment letters in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Okay, I'll also add additional HSE training in the in the discussion forum on where you can access additional HSE training. For example, if you appoint someone as a safety representative, there is specific HSE rep training you have to have. And these HSE trainings are only valid for a 3-year period, which means every 3 years you need to resend your workforce on the required HSE training, okay, to ensure they are competent and also to ensure that any new changes to legislation is implemented. Okay. All right. And like I said, based on the different industry or the size of the industry and the job at hand, your different roles and responsibilities will be at different levels. If it's a large, high-risk job, you're going to have a larger safety file with larger requirements. Perhaps you need a Department of Labor, notification of construction work. If you're just doing a small painting job at ground level, you'll just need a minor safety file and safety requirements. Okay. Like we said, communication is important and you need to ensure that you write reports, for example, an incident report if that happens, and report near misses immediately, as near misses can ensure we avoid having an actual incident on site. Okay. So these are critical elements influencing the effectiveness of a safety practitioner, the organization itself, the management employees, working with your safety reps, measuring and auditing your safety in the workplace, and abiding and updating your objectives. Okay. That brings us to the end. Thanks, guys.